Welcome to the VU Meters channel. In this video, I'm going to shoot out 5 pressings of Van Halen's debut album. But before we jump into the pressings, I'm going to cover my preferences when listening to vinyl, the process I used, the pressings I used, the results, and a little piece of bonus content. But first, we're going to get into a little Van Halen history and a couple of insights into the recording of Van Halen's debut album. Van Halen started to build up buzz in Pasadena, California. But at this point, clubs still wouldn't let them play there. They said that they were too loud and too edgy. So Van Halen started playing backyard gigs and building a following by handing out flyers at local high schools. However, the clubs did start letting them play there, including the legendary Whiskey A Go-Go. But it was one night in 1977 where Ted Templeman of Warner Brothers Records attended a Van Halen concert at the Starwood Club that would change things forever. Templeman saw there was something special with Van Halen, and he was blown away by the energy of their live show. So much so that he signed them to Warner Brothers Records. Van Halen 1 was recorded at Sunset Sound in October of 1977 for a cost of about $40,000, which is an amazing ROI when you consider it went on to sell over 10 million copies. Ted Templeman produced the album, and it was engineered by Don Landee. Templeman wanted to capture that raw live energy that he saw at the Van Halen show. So they opted for minimal overdubs and rather recorded the band live directly to tape. This, however, resulted in a recording that had Eddie's guitar panned to the left channel. When Landee was asked about this, he said that we didn't want to overdub the guitars, and if we put the guitar down the middle, it would have essentially been a mono mix. So he felt that that was a reasonable idea. And I bring this up because it's very relevant to the Shootout. There are many factors to consider when recording, engineering, and mastering music. And there is no optimal decision. All you can do at that moment is make the best set of compromises that results in an album that sounds great, that meets the artist's, producers, and label's vision. My preferences. I'm a big fan of soundstage and imaging when I listen to music, especially vinyl. Soundstage is a perceived space in which the music is being performed. I prefer pressings that have a wide and deep soundstage because it allows an expansive sound coming from all of the instruments and vocals. Imaging is the ability to hear detailed individual instruments and vocals within that soundstage. I prefer pressings that have precise imaging because it allows me to hear all of the nuances of the performance. Soundstage and imaging work together to create a realistic, immersive listening experience, that sort of in-the-room experience. My favorite thing is when people come over and listen to my system, they sit down, the first thing they say is, the singer's right there, right in the middle. And then they start looking around and pointing at different things, and I hear guitar over here, and bass over here, and drums there. And that is why I prefer soundstage and imaging when I'm listening to music, especially vinyl. Here's an overview of the process I used. This was not a blind shootout because I was doing this by myself. I don't have the ability to rapidly A and B 2 albums via a mixer because I only have one turntable. I use the same turntable, same system for all of the copies and all of the listening sessions in the Shootout. I use the same cleaning process and cleaned all of the albums the exact same way. I even level matched at my listening position with this trusty dB meter. I listened to all the records all the way through and took detailed notes. Then I went back and I listened to specific sections of songs and pressings one up against the other. I did this over a few days to try to prevent any potential bias. The only modification that I did was slight adjustment of the VTA, and that was to account for difference in the thickness of the records. And now, on to the pressings. I'm going to show you these in the order in which they were released. First off, 1978 US OG. This is a Jacksonville press. Discogs median price is $15. Next up, from 1998, DCC Compact Classics. This one is from the original analog master tapes, mastered by Steve Hoffman and Kevin Gray. These were numbered. This one is number 1173. Discogs median for this, $199. Now, moving on to the 2000s, more specifically 2009. This, also from the original analog tapes, also by Steve Hoffman and Kevin Gray. This one is on the Palm Tree label, and this one is pressed at RTI. Discogs median, $94. Now, 2020 pressing, again, from the analog master tapes, this time from Chris Bellman, and on a slightly modified Palm Tree label. Discogs median for this, $24. And now, the most recent pressing. 2023 Mobile Fidelity One Step. So this is cut from DSD 256, limited edition to 12,000. This one is number 2493. This is cut on 2 LPs at 45 RPM. So just a quick note on 45 compared to 33. Generally, they have a better sound quality. That's because it has a wider frequency range and reduced distortion. But again, just a generality, but I want to throw it out there because I am comparing a 45 to 33s. And these are the pressings we're going to use. Now the results. But first, a quick word. The purpose of this video is to share my preferences between these pressings. I want to emphasize that there are no absolute bests. It all comes down to what we each individually prefer. I don't want to create any FOMO, but rather share my experiences with these pressings, maybe help you decide which pressing might be best for you. Ultimately though, the best pressing is the one that you enjoy the most. So don't feel like you have to go out and get any of these pressings. Listen to different pressings when you can, see what you like best. But always remember, the most important thing is enjoying the music. So now for the results. First one we're going to go with is the OG. You're going to hear a recurring theme here, and it is that guitar panned to the left. That's going to come up on all of these pressings. It does get a little less prominent when the background vocals and solos come in. This pressing, the OG, has the narrowest soundstage. It projects the most forward, almost like a mono. I think that actually worsens the hard pan piece because it feels like it's right inside of your left ear. Volume varies considerably from track to track, like more so than other albums, especially on Eruption. This has fast bass, but really lacks in bass depth. Next one we're going to go with is the Chris Bellman. So again, same hard panning, but the vinyl is very quiet, and the bass is deeper, which helps balance things out a little. It does have a slightly wider soundstage. Volume variation between tracks is minimal, with the exception of Eruption. But this one, overall, I think is an improvement over the OG I have. Next up, DCC Compact Classics. Still very left heavy, but I think this sounds the most balanced out of all the 33s. Soundstage is very wide, especially when the background vocals and solos kick in. Slightly noisy vinyl, but it is 25 years old, and I bought it used at VG+. But this is my favorite 33 RPM mastering of this album. Next, RTI. So there's no discernible difference with the 2009 RTI repress to the DCC Compact Classics, and there shouldn't be because it's the same mastering. This, however, has thicker, quieter vinyl. It should be quieter because I bought it brand new when it was still available, but that is the 2009 RTI. Which leaves the only 45, the MoFi. So like all MoFi one-steps, very quiet vinyl, but it is cut much, much hotter than the other pressings. Like, I had to turn my volume down a few notches to match the levels on it. There is additional space and a wider soundstage in between the instruments, which I think helps with the pan guitar a little bit because it at least spreads it out a little bit like peanut butter. That wider soundstage does leave a lot of air in between the instruments. I felt like the reverb on the guitars just had a more natural, wider, longer decay. Same thing with the cymbals. The cymbals had more top end and they really rolled off more naturally. But it is cut pretty hot, and with that high end and the hot cutting, it is prone to sibilance, so I did experience sibilance in a couple of sections with this. So now, overall results. So best value. By far, easy, Chris Bellman. I like it. I think it's an improvement over the OG. It's readily available, and it's $24. Next, I'm going to go with the RTI. And this is my favorite 33 RPM. Now you have to consider that this costs like 3 to 4 times what the Chris Bellman one costs, but it's half of the DCC. It's the same mastering, similar presentation, quieter vinyl. So my favorite 33 RPM is the RTI, mastered by Kevin Gray and Steve Hoffman. These are my overall favorite, and this really shouldn't be a surprise given my preferences, and that is the MoFi. So with the MoFi, that wider soundstage really makes the panning more tolerable. It is cut hotter, so it is prone to sibilance in a couple of spots, but overall, this is the one that I enjoy the most. It's 45 RPM Mobile Fidelity one-step. Now, a little bonus. Van Halen was initially signed to Man of a Thousand Faces, Gene Simmons' production company. Gene first encountered Van Halen at the Starwood Club, but 1 year before Ted Templeman in 1976. Gene heard, quote, a flurry of stuff and classical melodies and assumed there were multiple guitar players on stage. But it was just Eddie Van Halen. Gene was blown away by the entire band, so much so that he flew him to New York, took him to Electric Lady Studios, and cut a 24-track demo. Unfortunately, Gene's bandmates and then Kiss manager did not share his enthusiasm for Van Halen. So after a year, he said, guys, you owe me nothing, I'm tearing up the contract, you're free to go. But we did get what's known as the Van Halen Zero demos out of this. This is an unofficial or bootleg. This one's on a cool splatter vinyl. One of my favorite songs on here eventually ended up on the album 1984, and that's House of Pain. The lyrics on it are different, and it actually includes the car horn that ended up being used on Running with the Devil, which is also on the Zero demos, which is on the debut album that we started with. So that's how we're going to go full circle and end this back on Van Halen's debut. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the Shootout. If you have any questions for me, leave them in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more vinyl videos.